People only laugh at what they don't understand, until the truth walks through the door. Those words would come back to Daniel Brooks much later that night, but as he adjusted the small blue bow tie around his 8-year-old daughter Lily's neck, they were the last thing on his mind. Outside the Sinclair Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago, sleek black luxury cars lined the entrance like polished chess pieces. Men in tailored tuxedos stepped onto the crimson carpet beside women wearing gowns worth more than most families earned in a month. Camera flashes reflected against the towering glass walls, capturing smiles that looked carefully rehearsed. Daniel glanced down at the invitation in his hand for what felt like the 10th time. "Ready, kiddo?" he asked with a warm smile. Lily grinned, smoothing the pale blue dress she had insisted on wearing because, according to her, it made her feel like a scientist who accidentally became a princess. "I've been ready forever," she replied. "What if they have robots?" Daniel laughed quietly. "I wouldn't count on robots at a charity gala. But it's a STEM award." "Fair point." She slipped her small hand into his, and together they climbed the marble staircase toward the entrance. Daniel's charcoal gray suit wasn't expensive, but it was spotless. It had been carefully pressed the night before. His polished brown shoes had seen years of use, yet they still carried a quiet dignity. He had shaved before sunrise and trimmed his hair himself in the bathroom mirror to save another trip to the barber. He didn't look wealthy. He looked like a father who always put his daughter first. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across hundreds of elegantly dressed guests. Soft piano music floated through the air while servers carried silver trays filled with sparkling drinks and delicate appetizers. Lily's eyes widened. "It's beautiful." Daniel nodded. "It is." Near the stage, a massive banner displayed the evening's purpose. The Sinclair Foundation Annual Innovation Gala. Tonight's event celebrated young students whose creativity had inspired communities across Illinois. Lily's name was among them. Daniel couldn't have been prouder. For months she had spent every Saturday building a simple water purification prototype using recycled materials. What began as a school project had eventually won the statewide junior STEM competition. She hadn't cared about the trophy. She had only wanted clean water to be easier for families after natural disasters. Daniel squeezed her shoulder gently. "Your mom would have loved seeing this." Lily smiled softly before looking toward the stage. "I know." They checked in at the reception table without any problems. The volunteer smiled warmly after scanning the invitation. "Congratulations, Miss Brooks. Please enjoy the evening." Everything seemed perfectly normal. Until they stepped farther into the ballroom. Conversation slowed. A few curious glances became lingering stares. One businessman quietly whispered something to the woman beside him. She looked Daniel up and down before raising an eyebrow. Another guest frowned as if trying to remember whether she knew him from somewhere. Within moments, subtle smiles began spreading across the room, not friendly smiles, but the kind reserved for someone who looked as though they had wandered into the wrong world. Daniel noticed. So did Lily. He simply smiled at his daughter. "Stay close." Neither of them realized that, from the opposite side of the ballroom, CO Victoria Sinclair had just looked up from her conversation, locked eyes with the plainly dressed single father beside the evening's youngest award recipient, and silently begun wondering who had made a very expensive mistake. Victoria Sinclair rarely noticed individuals in a crowded ballroom. She noticed influence, reputation, and opportunity. Faces blurred together unless they belonged to someone who could change the future of her foundation, or her company. But the man standing beside the little girl in the blue dress caught her attention immediately. Not because she recognized him. Because she didn't. She quietly excused herself from a circle of investors and watched as Daniel Brooks helped Lily reach a tray of miniature desserts that sat just beyond her height. "One only," Daniel reminded her with a smile. Lily giggled. "I know the rule." "What is it?" "Dessert tastes better after real food." "Smart girl." Victoria folded her arms. "He doesn't belong here," she murmured. Her executive assistant, Melissa, glanced toward Daniel. The invitation was scanned at the entrance. That doesn't mean it wasn't sent by mistake. Around them, conversations slowly shifted. Guests who had been discussing market forecasts and charitable investments now found themselves stealing glances toward the plainly dressed father. Some weren't openly rude. They simply stared a little too long. A man wearing a custom Italian tuxedo leaned toward his wife. Maybe he's one of the catering supervisors. She shook her head. No, look at the girl. She's wearing a participant badge. Another guest quietly laughed. So he's someone's driver. Daniel heard enough to understand exactly what was happening. He had experienced those looks before. At grocery stores. At expensive schools. At parent meetings where everyone assumed a single father couldn't possibly be the primary caregiver. Years ago, those moments used to make him angry. Now they only made him tired. He crouched beside Lily. You okay? She nodded, though her smile wasn't as bright as before. They keep looking at us. I know. Did I spill something? Daniel brushed an invisible crumb from her sleeve. No. Then why? He paused for a moment. Sometimes people decide who someone is before they've ever said hello. She considered his answer. That's silly. It usually is. Across the ballroom, Victoria continued watching. Something about Daniel's calm confidence bothered her. Most people who felt out of place either tried too hard to fit in or hurried toward the exit. He did neither. He simply existed as though he had every right to be there. She motioned toward Melissa again. Find out who invited him. Melissa hesitated. The little girl won the statewide junior STEM competition. I know who she is. Then, Victoria lowered her voice. My donors expect a certain atmosphere tonight. Melissa nodded uneasily before walking toward the registration desk. Daniel noticed the movement without reacting. He had learned long ago that dignity wasn't something another person could hand you. Nor could they take it away. Lily tugged gently on his sleeve. Dad? Can we look at the science displays? Of course. They wandered toward a series of exhibits showcasing inventions created by the evening's young finalists. Lily instantly became fascinated by a solar-powered emergency lantern. She asked thoughtful questions, listened carefully to every explanation, and thanked each volunteer with genuine enthusiasm. Several teachers smiled warmly at her curiosity. One whispered to another, She's remarkable. Daniel's face softened with quiet pride. For a few peaceful minutes, the whispers around them seemed to fade. Then Victoria arrived. She stopped only a few feet away, offering the polished smile that had made magazine covers and business interviews famous. Her eyes briefly met Daniel's before dropping to the invitations still tucked neatly inside his jacket pocket. Good evening, she said pleasantly. I hope you're enjoying the gala. Daniel returned the smile. My daughter certainly is. Victoria looked toward Lily, then back at Daniel. I'm very glad to hear that. Her tone remained perfectly polite. Only the question that followed carried the slightest edge. And may I ask, who invited you here tonight? Daniel met Victoria Sinclair's eyes without the slightest hint of discomfort. He had no idea who she was until he noticed several guests watching the exchange with unusual interest. Then he recognized her from magazine covers displayed in grocery store checkout lines, the founder of the Sinclair Foundation and one of the youngest CEOs in the country. He answered with the same calm voice he had used all evening. My daughter was invited after winning the Illinois Junior STEM competition. Victoria smiled politely. Yes, Miss Brooks is certainly one of our young honorees. Her gaze shifted back to Daniel. I was actually asking about you. Daniel nodded once. I'm here because she's 8 years old. The answer was so simple that it caught Victoria off guard. I'm sorry? I'm her father. A few nearby guests chuckled quietly. Victoria tilted her head. Of course. What I meant was, many of tonight's guests are donors, executives, or community leaders. Daniel understood the implication immediately. And parents, he replied. Another awkward silence settled between them. Victoria maintained her composed smile, but it no longer reached her eyes. "I'm sure there hasn't been any misunderstanding," she said. "Still, I prefer verifying our guest list personally." Daniel reached into his jacket and handed her the invitation without hesitation. She examined it carefully. The embossed seal was genuine. The barcode had already been scanned. Everything appeared authentic. Melissa returned from the registration desk just then. "I checked," she whispered. "His invitation is valid." Victoria lowered her voice. "Who approved the extra guest?" "The competition committee. Every child winner could bring one parent or guardian." Victoria looked at Daniel again. "So you came as the parent?" "That's right." One businessman nearby laughed under his breath. "I guess the rules really are changing." Another added quietly, "Next year they'll probably invite babysitters." Several people smiled. Daniel heard every word. He simply slipped the invitation back into his pocket. Lily looked from one adult to another, sensing the tension she couldn't fully understand. She tugged gently on Daniel's sleeve. "Dad." He looked down. "It's okay. But they're laughing." Daniel forced a reassuring smile. "They're not laughing at you." She searched his face. "They're laughing at us." The innocence in her voice landed harder than any insult spoken that evening. A nearby volunteer lowered her eyes. Even Melissa looked uncomfortable. Victoria noticed the exchange but chose to continue. "Mr. Brooks, perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the family reception area until the ceremony begins." Daniel understood exactly what she meant. Away from the ballroom. Away from the donors. Away from the cameras. He spoke with complete courtesy. "My daughter would like to see the exhibits. I'm sure she can later." "She's seeing them now." Victoria's smile grew thinner. "I don't want tonight's program interrupted by unnecessary confusion." Daniel folded his hands in front of him. "There doesn't seem to be any confusion from where I'm standing." The surrounding guests exchanged amused glances. One investor whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "He certainly has confidence." "Confidence is free," another replied. Laughter rippled through the group. Lily instinctively moved closer to her father until she was holding his hand with both of hers. Daniel looked down at her tiny fingers wrapped tightly around his own. For a brief moment, he considered leaving. Not because of Victoria. Not because of the whispers. Because no little girl should have to wonder why adults smiled while trying to make someone else feel small. He took a slow breath, already preparing to tell Lily they would go home. Then, somewhere beyond the ballroom entrance, the deep rumble of several powerful engines echoed through the hotel lobby, causing conversations across the room to gradually fall silent. The laughter faded long before anyone understood why. At first, it was only a distant vibration beneath the ballroom floor. Then came the unmistakable sound of several powerful engines pulling to a stop outside the hotel entrance. One conversation after another simply ended. Guests instinctively turned toward the towering glass doors. Valets hurried across the driveway. Security personnel spoke urgently into their earpieces. Even the string quartet faltered for a moment before continuing their performance. Victoria frowned. "I wasn't expecting anyone else." Melissa glanced toward the entrance. Neither was the event coordinator. Daniel barely noticed. His attention remained on Lily, who still clung tightly to his hand. He knelt beside her. "Hey." She looked at him with uncertain eyes. "Are we leaving?" Daniel hesitated. Every instinct as a father told him to take her home. No award ceremony was worth watching his daughter wonder why grown adults had laughed at them. He gently brushed a loose strand of blonde hair away from her face. "What do you want to do?" Lily looked toward the science displays one last time. Then she whispered so quietly only Daniel could hear, "I don't want them to think we ran away." His heart tightened. She shouldn't have been carrying thoughts like that at 8 years old. He smiled softly. "Then we won't run." She nodded. For the first time in several minutes, a small smile returned to her face. Across the ballroom, Victoria continued watching them. Something about Daniel unsettled her. He never argued. He never begged. He never tried to prove himself. Instead, he treated every uncomfortable moment as though it mattered less than protecting the little girl standing beside him. Melissa leaned closer. "Should I ask security to escort them to the reception lounge?" Victoria answered without taking her eyes off Daniel. "Not yet." At that exact moment, the ballroom doors opened. A cold evening breeze swept briefly across the marble floor. Outside, 3 black military SUVs had stopped beneath the hotel's grand entrance canopy. Behind them stood several uniformed military police officers. Every head in the ballroom turned. Whispers spread almost instantly. "Who's arriving? A senator? The governor?" "No." Someone near the entrance spoke with unmistakable surprise. "Those are army vehicles." The room grew noticeably quieter. Hotel staff instinctively stepped aside. Several veterans attending the gala straightened their posture without even realizing it. The first SUV door opened. A decorated military officer stepped out. Then another. Finally, an older man emerged from the center vehicle. His dress uniform carried 4 silver stars across each shoulder. Rows of ribbons stretched neatly across his chest. Years of command seemed etched into every calm movement he made. No introduction was necessary. Nearly everyone recognized him. General Raymond Carter. Conversation stopped completely. Victoria immediately walked toward the entrance, her professional smile returning as cameras quickly repositioned. "This is unexpected," she whispered to Melissa. "He never confirmed attendance." Several board members hurried forward, eager to greet one of the nation's most respected military leaders. General Carter acknowledged them with polite nods but didn't stop walking. His eyes moved slowly across the ballroom, as though he were searching for someone. Victoria extended her hand confidently. "General Carter, what an honor! Welcome to the Sinclair Foundation Gala." The general shook her hand briefly. "Thank you." His attention drifted beyond her almost immediately. He continued scanning the room. Left. Right. Then, his expression changed. The years seemed to fall away from his face in a single heartbeat. His eyes locked onto a man standing quietly beside a little girl in a blue dress near the science exhibits. Without another word, General Raymond Carter stepped past the CO, past the donors, past every waiting camera, and began walking directly toward Daniel Brooks. No one in the ballroom could understand why a 4-star general had ignored the most powerful people in the room. Every eye followed General Raymond Carter. His polished shoes echoed softly against the marble floor. Board members stepped aside. Executives instinctively cleared a path. Even Victoria Sinclair remained frozen where she stood, her outstretched hands slowly falling back to her side. General Carter never looked left. He never looked right. His attention remained fixed on one man. Daniel watched the general approach with quiet surprise. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Lily glanced up at her father. "Dad, do you know him?" Daniel searched the older man's face. Time had added gray hair and deeper lines around his eyes, but something about the way he carried himself stirred a distant memory. Before Daniel could finish, General Carter stopped directly in front of him. The ballroom fell completely silent. Every camera turned toward them. The general stood perfectly still. Then, without the slightest hesitation, he drew himself to full attention. His white-gloved right hand rose sharply to the brim of his service cap. A flawless military salute, directed entirely at Daniel Brooks. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Someone dropped a champagne glass. Its sharp crack against the marble floor sounded almost deafening inside the stunned silence. Victoria stared in disbelief. Several veterans attending the gala instinctively straightened as well, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. A 4-star Army general did not casually salute civilians. Certainly not at a charity gala. Certainly not a man everyone had dismissed only moments before. Daniel looked genuinely uncomfortable. "General." Carter's expression softened into something far more personal than military formality. "It's good to see you again, sir." Daniel quickly lowered the general's hand. You don't need to do that. Yes, Carter answered quietly. I do. The words carried no performance. Only gratitude. Lily looked from one man to the other. Her eyes grew wide. You know my dad? General Carter smiled warmly before lowering himself onto one knee so he could speak at her eye level. I know your father better than you can imagine. Lily blinked. Is he your friend? Carter chuckled softly. I would be honored to call him that. Around them, whispers erupted. Who is he? What did he do? Was he a general too? No, he'd be wearing different insignia. Victoria slowly approached again, struggling to regain control of the evening. General Carter. He stood but kept his attention on Daniel. I apologize for interrupting your event. No interruption at all, Victoria replied carefully. We were simply surprised. So was I. The general looked back at Daniel. I never expected to find you here. Daniel smiled faintly. My daughter earned an invitation. He rested a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. She's receiving a STEM award. General Carter's face lit up. Then congratulations, young lady. Lily smiled proudly. Thank you. He looked back at Daniel. I should have known she'd accomplish something remarkable. Daniel laughed quietly. She gets that from her mother. For just a moment, sorrow flickered across his face. The general noticed it immediately but chose not to ask. Instead, he nodded with quiet understanding. Across the ballroom, every conversation had completely changed. Only minutes earlier, people had questioned whether Daniel belonged inside the building. Now no one questioned whether he mattered. They questioned how they had failed to recognize the man whom one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Army had publicly honored with a salute reserved not for power, but for profound respect. General Carter slowly turned toward the crowd, as if he could still hear the laughter that had filled the ballroom only minutes earlier. His voice remained calm. I imagine many of you are wondering why I saluted Mr. Daniel Brooks. No one answered. No one dared. Victoria stood motionless beside the stage, her carefully practiced confidence replaced by genuine uncertainty. Daniel spoke quietly. General, there's no need. Carter looked at him with unmistakable respect. There has been a need for 14 years. The ballroom became even quieter. Lily looked up at her father. You've known him that long? Daniel gave a small nod. A long time. General Carter faced the audience once more. 14 years ago, I wasn't a general. He paused. I was a lieutenant colonel leading a disaster response unit after a massive flood devastated a rural community. Several guests leaned forward. The mission should have been routine. It wasn't. He folded his hands behind his back. A temporary bridge collapsed while civilians were still being evacuated. The room listened in complete silence. Our convoy was swept into the river. His eyes drifted briefly toward Daniel. I was trapped inside an overturned rescue vehicle. Victoria's expression slowly changed. Carter continued. The current was too strong. My radio failed. I lost consciousness more than once. He paused, choosing each word carefully. When I finally believed I wasn't getting out alive. He looked directly at Daniel. One rescue officer ignored every order to stay back. Daniel lowered his eyes. The general smiled faintly. He tied a safety line around himself and entered water powerful enough to tear apart military equipment. A murmur spread across the room. He reached my vehicle. He broke the driver's side window. He pulled me free. Several guests exchanged stunned glances. Carter continued. By the time we reached shore, he had almost no strength left. He collapsed before anyone could even thank him. Lily stared at her father. You saved him? Daniel smiled awkwardly. It wasn't just him. There were other people. General Carter nodded. Exactly. He turned back toward the audience. That was Daniel Brooks. He never asked for recognition. He never requested a medal. In fact, a faint smile crossed the general's face. He declined the public ceremony entirely. Someone near the back whispered, "Why?" Daniel answered before Carter could. "Because everyone on that team did their job. I wasn't special." The humility in his voice made the silence even heavier. General Carter gently shook his head. "You've always believed that." "I never did." Victoria stepped forward carefully. "Mr. Brooks, were you in the army?" Daniel answered honestly. "No. I served as a civilian rescue officer attached to emergency operations. My wife and I both did." A shadow crossed his face. "After she passed away, I resigned." He rested his hand on Lily's shoulder. She needed a father more than the country needed another rescue officer. Lily instinctively wrapped both arms around his waist. The general looked at her kindly. "Your father gave up the career he loved because raising you became the most important mission of his life." Tears quietly appeared in more than one pair of eyes. Daniel gave an embarrassed laugh. "I didn't give anything up. I simply chose the better assignment." The room remained silent. Not because anyone expected another dramatic revelation, but because they suddenly realized the greatest thing about Daniel Brooks had never been the life he once saved. It was the quiet life he had chosen every single day since, asking for no applause while becoming exactly the kind of father his daughter would always remember. The silence inside the ballroom no longer belonged to surprise. It belonged to shame. Only minutes earlier, expensive suits and polished smiles had hidden quiet judgment. Now, no one seemed willing to meet Daniel Brooks's eyes. Victoria Sinclair slowly stepped toward him. For the first time that evening, she wasn't speaking as the celebrated CEO whose name appeared on magazine covers. She was simply a woman realizing she had made a painful mistake. "Mr. Brooks." Daniel turned politely. "Yes?" She hesitated. Words that usually came effortlessly refused to appear. "I owe you an apology." Daniel offered a gentle smile. "You don't owe me anything." "I do." Her voice was softer now. "I judged you before I knew anything about you." Daniel glanced at Lily before answering. "I think we've all done that at some point." Victoria lowered her eyes. "But I embarrass you." "You embarrass yourself." The words were spoken without anger, without satisfaction, simply as truth. They landed harder than any accusation could have. Around them, several guests quietly drifted away, suddenly fascinated by their glasses, their phones, or the decorations hanging from the ballroom ceiling. No one wanted to admit they had laughed. General Carter remained nearby, watching without interruption. Victoria took a slow breath. "When I built this foundation, I wanted it to reward talent regardless of background." She looked around the room. "Tonight I became exactly the kind of person I promised never to become." Daniel studied her expression. For the first time, he saw no pride. Only regret. Lily gently tugged on her father's sleeve. "Dad?" He looked down. "Yes?" "Mom used to say people can make mistakes." Daniel smiled. "She did. And she said saying sorry is brave." Victoria heard every word. She knelt until she was eye level with Lily. "Your mother was a very wise woman." Lily nodded proudly. "She was." Victoria looked back at Daniel. "I can't undo what happened." "No. But I'd like to make it right." Daniel remained quiet. She continued. "Not for publicity. Not for the cameras. They've already stopped recording." Sure enough, most photographers had lowered their cameras, sensing this was no longer a headline but a deeply personal moment. Victoria extended her hand. "Would you allow me another chance to welcome you properly?" Daniel looked at her hand for a long moment. Then he shook it. Not because she was wealthy. Not because she was powerful. Because refusing genuine humility would have taught Lily the wrong lesson. A quiet sigh of relief seemed to pass through the room. General Carter smiled almost imperceptibly. Victoria turned toward the audience. Her voice carried clearly across the ballroom. "Before we continue tonight's program, I'd like to acknowledge something." Every guest looked up. "We often speak about innovation. We celebrate intelligence. We praise leadership. She paused. But none of those qualities matter if we fail to recognize simple human dignity. No one moved. I nearly asked a devoted father to leave because his suit didn't match the room. She swallowed hard. That failure belongs entirely to me. Several board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. One donor slowly began applauding. Then another. Soon the applause spread across the ballroom. Not loud. Not theatrical. Steady. Respectful. Daniel shifted awkwardly under the attention. He leaned toward Lily and whispered, "I liked it better when nobody was looking." She smiled. "I like when they're looking for the right reason." Daniel laughed quietly. "So do I." For the first time since entering the Sinclair Grand Hotel, the applause that filled the ballroom was not celebrating wealth, influence, or reputation. It was honoring something far rarer, a father whose greatest achievement had never been saving a life in a flood, but raising a daughter whose kindness reminded an entire room what true respect looked like. The evening's program resumed, but nothing about it felt the same. The chandeliers still cast warm light across the ballroom. The orchestra still played softly. Servers still moved gracefully between tables. Yet the atmosphere had changed. People were no longer measuring one another by tailored suits, business titles, or family names. They were watching an ordinary father sit beside his daughter. Victoria returned to the stage. For a moment, she stood silently behind the podium. Then she smiled. "When we planned tonight's gala, we believed the most inspiring stories would come from remarkable inventions." She glanced toward Lily. "It turns out the most important lesson came from the people behind one of those inventions." A ripple of gentle applause filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she continued, "it is my privilege to introduce our next honoree, Lily Brooks." Lily's eyes widened. "Dad." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Go show them who you are." She took a nervous breath. "What if I forget my speech?" Daniel smiled. "Then tell them what you told me in the garage while you were building your project." She laughed quietly. "I don't even remember." "You will." She nodded. As Lily walked toward the stage, the applause grew stronger. This time it wasn't polite. It was heartfelt. Victoria welcomed her with genuine warmth. "Lily, your water purification project impressed every member of our science committee." She handed Lily a crystal award. "But after meeting you tonight..." Victoria paused. "I think your kindness may change even more lives than your invention." Lily blushed. "Thank you?" She looked out across the enormous ballroom. Hundreds of faces stared back. Only hours earlier, that would have frightened her. Now she searched until she found one familiar face. Her father. Standing quietly near the back. Smiling. She relaxed. "I made my project because clean water shouldn't depend on where someone lives." Her small voice carried clearly through the silent room. "My dad always says helping people is never wasted." She looked toward Daniel again. "He taught me that smart people solve problems. But kind people notice them first." Several guests quietly wiped away tears. General Carter smiled proudly. Victoria lowered her head for a brief moment. Daniel wished he could disappear into the crowd. Instead, he applauded with everyone else. When Lily finished speaking, the ballroom erupted into a standing ovation. She hurried back toward her father, nearly dropping the award in her excitement. "I remembered!" Daniel laughed as she wrapped her arms around him. "I knew you would." She held up the crystal trophy. "This belongs to both of us." "No." He gently shook his head. "You built it. You helped. I handed you tools. You handed me confidence." Daniel blinked, caught completely off guard. General Carter walked over quietly. "I've commanded thousands of soldiers." He looked at Daniel. "I've met scientists, astronauts, governors, and presidents." Then he smiled at Lily. "But I suspect the future is in very good hands." Daniel chuckled softly. "Only if she remembers to clean her room once in a while." Lily groaned. "Dad." The people around them laughed. Not with cruelty. Not with superiority. simply with warmth. Daniel looked across the ballroom one final time. Then, almost absent-mindedly, he spoke the words that General Carter would remember for the rest of his life. Respect should never require a uniform. He glanced at Lily. Or a title. Or a paycheck. It should begin the moment we remember that every person we meet is carrying a story we haven't heard yet. This time, no applause came immediately. Because some lessons deserve silence before they deserve applause. The gala ended the way most elegant evenings do. Guests collected their coats. Conversations drifted toward business meetings, travel plans, and tomorrow's schedules. The orchestra packed away their instruments. One by one, the ballroom slowly emptied. Daniel and Lily stood near the entrance, preparing to leave. Lily carefully held her crystal award with both hands as though it were made of glass and sunlight. General Carter walked over one last time. "I won't keep you." Daniel smiled. "You never could." The general laughed. "Still impossible to order around. I was never very good at taking unnecessary orders." Carter extended his hand. Daniel accepted it. "No more disappearing," the general said. "The country has enough heroes nobody remembers." Daniel shook his head gently. "The country remembers the right people." General Carter smiled. "I disagree." Before leaving, he turned to Lily. "Take good care of your father." She nodded seriously. "I always do." "I know." The general saluted her with 2 fingers. She returned the gesture with an awkward little salute that made everyone nearby smile. As he walked away, Victoria approached carrying a small envelope. "Mr. Brooks." Daniel looked up. "I wanted you to have this." He accepted the envelope but did not open it. "What is it?" "A scholarship." She smiled at Lily. "The Sinclair Foundation has unanimously decided to fund every stage of Lily's education, from today through graduate school, wherever her talent leads her." Daniel looked surprised. "That's incredibly generous." Victoria shook her head. "It isn't charity. It's an investment." She looked at Lily. "The world needs minds like yours." Lily looked at her father. "Can we accept?" Daniel thought for a moment. Then he nodded. "We can." He turned back to Victoria. "Thank you?" She smiled. "No. This time. Thank you?" Outside, the cool Chicago night greeted them. The city lights shimmered across the streets. Traffic moved steadily through downtown. Daniel and Lily walked toward their old pickup truck. It looked exactly as it had a few hours earlier. A little worn. A little scratched. Perfectly ordinary. Lily climbed inside but didn't close the door. "Dad?" "Yes?" "Did tonight change anything?" Daniel looked across the skyline before answering. "I hope not." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I hope it didn't change who we are." He leaned against the truck. "People treated us differently after they learned my story. That felt nice." "It did. But kindness shouldn't depend on knowing someone's achievements." Lily thought quietly. "So, we should be kind first." Daniel smiled. "Exactly." She looked down at the crystal award resting in her lap. "I think that's what Mom would have wanted." He closed his eyes for just a second. "So do I." As they drove away, the lights of the Sinclair Grand Hotel gradually disappeared in the rearview mirror. Inside that ballroom, many people would remember the salute. Some would remember the rescue. Others would remember the apology. But years later, the moment that would remain longest in their hearts would not be the arrival of a 4-star general or the recognition of a forgotten hero. It would be the image of a little girl standing on a stage, proudly repeating the lessons her father had quietly lived every day. Because true honor is rarely announced. True courage seldom introduces itself. And the greatest legacy a parent can leave behind is not wealth, status, or recognition. It is raising a child who chooses compassion before judgment, humility before pride, and respect before assumptions. Long after the applause faded, those lessons continued traveling from one life to another, proving that the strongest people are often the ones who never ask the world to notice them at all.